A city's soul was once measured by the height of its stone prayers. The Gothic Cathedral was the ultimate civic statement, a declaration carved in glass and vaulted stone. During the High Middle Ages, a silent but ferocious rivalry gripped the cities of Europe, a competition where urban identity, wealth, and even divine favor were expressed through the sheer scale and splendor of a single building. This was not just about architecture, it was about supremacy. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these stone giants were not merely built, but weaponized in a contest that forged the modern city itself. We will uncover why a cathedral's collapse could cripple a city's spirit, and how the quest for heavenly light fueled earthly economies. What does it truly mean for a building to define a people's ambition? The Romanesque world was a fortress of faith, its churches built like sacred strongholds with thick walls and small windows. Then came the Revolution, a set of ideas so powerful they would literally lift stone into the sky. This new approach was not about decoration, it was about physics. Architects discovered they could redirect the crushing weight of a stone roof away from the walls, and this single insight changed everything. The pointed arch, sharper and more dynamic than the rounded Roman arch, channeled forces downward more efficiently. That downward thrust was then captured by a skeleton of stone ribs, which formed the ceiling's vaults. But the true genius, the innovation that unlocked the vertical race, was the flying buttress. These elegant stone arms reached out from the building's exterior like the roots of a great tree, catching the outward push of the vaults and grounding it safely into the earth. With the walls no longer bearing the main load, they could be replaced, and what replaced them was light. Vast windows of stained glass, depicting biblical stories in radiant color, turned the entire structure into a lantern. This was the Gothic Toolkit. It transformed a church from a place of shadow into a vessel of divine illumination, and it gave ambitious city councils a measurable goal. Height was no longer just a symbol, it was now an engineering possibility. The race for the heavens had a rulebook written in pointed arches and flying stone. But ambition needs a blueprint. The city of Chartres, rising from the ashes of a devastating fire in the year 1194, would provide the perfect one. This was not a slow evolution, but a defiant act of civic will. The cathedral that stood there was consumed by flames, leaving its most sacred relic, a piece of cloth believed to be the Virgin Mary's tunic, seemingly lost. When the relic was miraculously discovered intact in the smoldering crypt, the townspeople saw it as a divine mandate to rebuild, and to rebuild bigger, taller, and more luminous than ever before. What followed was a construction campaign of astonishing speed and unity. Donations poured in from every level of society, from nobles to merchants to local farmers who hitched themselves to carts to haul stone. The new design embraced every element of the Gothic Revolution with breathtaking confidence. Its flying buttresses, more pronounced and systematic than in any prior building, formed a visible exoskeleton that allowed the walls to become vast, uninterrupted canvases of glass. And it was this glass that defined Chartres, the famous Chartres blue, a deep, luminous cobalt achieved through a complex and costly process, flooded the interior with an ethereal light unlike anything seen before. The clarity and scale of the windows, telling sacred stories with jewel-like brilliance, created an immersive environment of faith and wonder. Chartres did not just introduce new techniques, it perfected them into a coherent and awe-inspiring whole. It stood as living proof. A project of such staggering scale and beauty was not only possible, it could be completed within a single generation through collective effort. For every bishop and town council across France and beyond, Chartres became the undeniable benchmark. It was the cathedral to beat. If Chartres could do it, why couldn't they? And more importantly, if they didn't, their city would be seen as lesser, their faith as lukewarm, their ambition as feeble. The blueprint was now public, and the silent signal for a continent-wide competition had been sent. Yet this blueprint alone could not spark a rivalry. It needed fuel, and that fuel was the very fabric of medieval society itself. The 12th and 13th centuries were a time of profound transformation across Europe. Peace, however fragile, and improved farming techniques led to population growth and a surge in trade. Money, not just land, began to flow. In the bustling market squares of cities like Amiens, Beauvais, and Cologne, a new class emerged, the merchant burghers. These were not nobles bound by ancient titles, but self-made individuals whose wealth was counted in coin and commodities. Alongside them, the bishops and city councils wielded growing power, often navigating a delicate dance with distant kings and local nobles. For these urban leaders, a cathedral was far more than a house of worship. It was the ultimate civic instrument. Building one demonstrated three things simultaneously: unassailable piety, immense economic strength, and political independence. A soaring new choir or a record-breaking spire was a statement to rival cities, a message to the monarchy, and an offering to heaven, all in one stone gesture. It announced, we are prosperous enough to undertake this, we are devout enough to deserve it, and we are powerful enough to see it through. In this competitive landscape, where city charters and trade privileges were constantly negotiated, visual grandeur became a form of diplomacy. Your cathedral was your city's resume, written in limestone and lit by the sun. To build higher and more brilliantly was to claim a greater share of divine favor and earthly prestige, pulling pilgrims, merchants, and skilled craftsmen to your gates. The stage was now set, not with quiet reverence, but with the vibrant, ambitious energy of urban Europe, ready to turn faith into a formidable contest. The blueprint from Chartres now had a challenger, one obsessed with a single, measurable goal. Amiens Cathedral would not just match the new standard, it would shatter it by reaching for a dimension that spoke directly to the medieval soul: vertical supremacy. While Chartres had perfected the harmonious integration of light and structure, the master builders of Amiens focused their entire ambition on one breathtaking statistic: the height of the nave vaults. They pushed the Gothic skeleton to its absolute limit, achieving an interior height of over 138 feet. To stand in that nave today is to experience a deliberate act of awe engineering, a space so vertiginously tall it seems to pull the gaze and the spirit irresistibly upward. This was not an incremental improvement, it was a statement. The community of Amiens, flush with wealth from the woad dye trade, funded this audacious project with a clear competitive vision. They wanted the tallest completed cathedral in France, a title that would draw pilgrims away from other sites and cement their city's preeminence. The engineering daring involved was immense. To support such lofty vaults, the flying buttresses had to be stronger, the piers slimmer yet more resilient, every calculation balanced on a knife's edge of medieval physics. Their success was transformative. Amiens did not merely build a tall church, it fundamentally shifted the terms of the entire rivalry. Height was no longer just one quality among many, it became the paramount metric, the single most obvious way to claim victory in the urban contest. After Amiens, every city with cathedral ambitions had to answer one unavoidable question: could they build higher? The race was now quantified, and the stakes were literally sky high. But ambition has a breaking point. The city of Beauvais looked at the soaring vaults of Amiens and saw not a triumph, but a challenge. Their goal was not merely to compete, but to dominate, to build a cathedral so magnificent it would render all others obsolete. They focused their efforts on the choir, the sacred heart of the church where the clergy performed the daily offices. This structure, begun around the year 1225, was designed to be the tallest Gothic space ever conceived, pushing the known limits of engineering to achieve a vault height of nearly 157 feet. For a time, it seemed they had succeeded. The choir of Beauvais was a breathtaking marvel, a forest of slender columns reaching into a dizzying canopy of stone. It stood for over a decade as a monument to human audacity, the ultimate trophy in the architectural race. Then, in 1284, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, a large portion of those magnificent vaults collapsed inward. The sound of crashing stone would have been catastrophic, both physically and psychologically. This was not a minor repair, it was a fundamental failure at the very apex of their ambition. Analysis by later engineers suggests several intertwined causes. The structure was simply too tall and too slender for the technology of its time. The supporting piers, while elegant, may have been inadequately anchored. The flying buttresses, the very system that made such heights possible, were likely under-designed for the tremendous outward thrust generated by such an immense roof. Some historians also note that construction may have progressed too rapidly, without allowing the mortar in the lower sections to fully cure and settle before adding the staggering weight above. The collapse at Beauvais was more than a construction disaster. It was a profound lesson written in rubble. It demonstrated a hard truth about the Gothic Revolution, that every innovation has a limit, and that the relentless pursuit of a single metric, like height, could blind builders to the delicate balance required by their own stone skeletons. The dream of Beauvais was never fully realized. Efforts to repair and continue were plagued by further collapses and instability, a centuries-long struggle against gravity itself. The cathedral stands today as a magnificent fragment, its choir forever severed from a never-completed nave. It serves as the ultimate cautionary tale, a reminder that in the race to touch the heavens, one must first build a foundation that can hold the sky. While stone skeletons reached for the sky, the true soul of the cathedral was painted with light. If height was the measure of ambition, then stained glass became the medium of divine propaganda, a breathtakingly expensive and luminous battleground in the urban rivalry. Cities soon realized that a vast, dark interior was a failure, no matter how tall. The goal was to transform sunlight into sacred storytelling, to bathe the faithful in a kaleidoscope of holy narrative that no other building could match. This was not merely decoration, it was spiritual engineering. The quality of the glass, the rarity of the pigments, and the sophistication of the stories told became direct reflections of a city's wealth, piety, and artistic patronage. A magnificent window was a permanent sermon in radiant color, visible from the outside as a jeweled promise and from the inside as an immersive heaven. Consider the great rose windows of Notre-Dame de Paris. These enormous circular marvels, functioning like radiant stone wheels, were feats of both glazing and structural daring. Their intricate stone tracery held hundreds of individual panels depicting prophets, saints, and cosmic symbols in a precise, radiating order. To a medieval worshipper standing in the nave and looking up at the north rose window, it was not just a beautiful image, it was a vision of the universe as God intended, harmony and order made manifest in light and stone. The cost was astronomical. The deep blues required cobalt, an imported mineral, while vibrant reds needed gold chloride, literally suspending precious metal in the glass. A cathedral boasting such windows was announcing, "We can command the finest materials from across the known world and master the most complex crafts to glorify the divine." Other cities competed through narrative scale. The Cathedral of Bourges, for instance, unfolds entire biblical sagas across its vast window surfaces, from Genesis to the Apocalypse, creating a comprehensive visual Bible for an illiterate populace. Pilgrims would walk the aisles following the stories in light, each scene a chapter in a luminous holy book unique to that city. The more comprehensive and exquisite the cycle, the more powerful the draw for pilgrims seeking enlightenment. This created a self-reinforcing economy of awe. Pilgrims brought donations which funded more windows, which attracted more pilgrims, enhancing the city's prestige and economic might. In this silent contest, light itself was weaponized. A cathedral dim with poor or plain glass was seen as lacking in devotion or resources, while a rival sanctuary, ablaze with sophisticated holy light, claimed a closer connection to the divine. It was a competition where the victory was not just seen but felt as colored light fell upon the faces of the faithful, convincing them they stood in the most blessed space on earth. Yet this luminous interior drama demanded an exterior prologue, a stone billboard facing the city square. The cathedral facade, especially its grand west front, was not merely an entrance. It was the city's permanent public address to pilgrims, traders, and rival delegations. Here, the competition shifted from vaulted heights and colored light to a different kind of spectacle, sculptural storytelling on a monumental scale. The portals, those deeply recessed doorways, transformed into stone encyclopedias of faith, designed to educate and overwhelm. For a largely non-literate populace, these carvings were the scripture they could read, a complete visual theology from the Last Judgment to the lives of saints. But woven into this sacred narrative was a powerful thread of civic pride and political messaging. Look at the west facade of Reims Cathedral, the coronation church of French kings. Its sculpture program is a masterclass in blending divine authority with royal power. Alongside biblical prophets and apostles stand statues of the very monarchs crowned within, seamlessly integrating the French monarchy into sacred history. This was a clear statement. Reims was not just any cathedral city, it was the sacred stage for the nation's destiny. Compare this to Amiens, its famous Beau Dieu, or beautiful God, statue on the central trumeau presents a serene, benevolent Christ, a theological ideal. But the facade's lower register also features a vivid, almost encyclopedic depiction of the seasons and labors of the months, connecting the sacred structure directly to the agricultural rhythms and daily life of the community that built it. It grounds heaven in the earthly reality of its people. Then there is Notre-Dame de Paris, its famed gallery of kings, a line of 28 statues of Judean monarchs high across the facade, was long misunderstood by later Parisians as a parade of French kings. This misinterpretation itself is telling. The facade communicated such regal authority that citizens naturally saw their own rulers in it. Furthermore, the inclusion of local saints like Saint Denis on the portals claimed a specific spiritual pedigree for Paris, tying the cathedral's universal message to the city's unique history and patron protectors. Even contemporary bishops and wealthy donors sometimes had their likenesses carved into the stone, immortalizing their patronage and ensuring their earthly legacy was forever part of the Holy Gate. So the facade served a dual, powerful purpose. To the pilgrim, it was a preparatory catechism in stone, a visual sermon before entering the light within. To the rival city or the visiting noble, it was a complex civic emblem announcing who held power, which saints favored this place, and how deeply rooted the community's wealth and devotion truly were. In the facade wars, a city told the world its story, proving its sophistication not just through engineering, but through the eloquent silence of 1,000 sculpted faces. These stone dreams had an undeniable price tag, one that could bankrupt a city if not managed with the same ingenuity as its vaults. Building a cathedral was the largest financial undertaking of the medieval world, a multi-generational investment that required turning faith into a sustainable economic engine. The money did not come from a single king's treasury, but from the collective effort of the entire urban ecosystem, transforming every citizen into a stakeholder in the skyward ambition. Wealthy merchant guilds, from the drapers to the silversmiths, became major patrons, often commissioning entire chapels or windows in exchange for their insignia being forever etched into the holy glass. Their donations were both pious and profoundly practical, a public display of success that also brought social standing and divine favor. For ordinary citizens, giving a few coins to the Cathedral Fabric Fund became a routine act of civic and religious duty, a direct investment in their city's heavenly credit and earthly reputation. Another critical stream of revenue flowed from the very purpose of the building, pilgrimage. A cathedral housing a major relic like the tunic at Chartres or the crown of thorns at Paris became a destination. This relic tourism was a powerful economic driver. Pilgrims needed food, shelter, souvenirs, and guides, creating a thriving service industry that funneled money directly into the city's coffers, a portion of which was then dedicated to the ongoing construction. The church also offered spiritual incentives for giving. The sale of indulgences, which reduced the time a soul was believed to spend in a state of purification, provided a direct theological return on investment for the devout donor. While later controversial, in this era they were a widely accepted mechanism for funding God's work on earth. Perhaps most telling was the implementation of municipal taxes and levies specifically for the building campaign. A city might impose a special tax on goods sold in the market or a portion of the fines collected by its courts. This formalized the cathedral not as a church project alone, but as a municipal public works project of the highest order. The ongoing financial commitment, stretching across decades or even centuries, became its own point of fierce civic pride. A city that could sustain the cash flow for such a marathon endeavor was demonstrating remarkable economic resilience and social cohesion. It bound the community together across generations, with grandparents telling stories of the foundation being laid and grandchildren hoping to see the final spire capped. The construction site itself was a constant, bustling economic hub, employing armies of quarrymen, carters, sculptors, glaziers, and blacksmiths, whose wages circulated back into the local economy. So the cathedral's rise was mirrored by the health of the city's purse, a visible gauge of its collective wealth and will. To stop funding was to admit defeat, not just in the architectural race, but in the very vitality of the city itself. The dream was sustained by a profound, shared understanding that their earthly prosperity and their heavenly aspirations were built from the same fund. Behind every soaring vault and luminous window stood a mind, a master of geometry and stone who commanded a salary rivaling that of a knight. The master mason or architect emerged from the anonymity of the medieval craftsman to become the era's first true celebrity engineer, a living repository of secrets whose very presence could guarantee a city's victory in the architectural race. These men were not merely builders, they were inventors and system thinkers, the only ones who held the complete mental blueprint of a structure that might take a century to complete. Their knowledge was a form of priceless, portable intellectual property, and cities fiercely competed to acquire it. Consider Robert de Lousarches, the first master mason of Amiens Cathedral. His brilliant design for that record-breaking nave vault established his reputation as a genius of verticality. While we lack the employment contracts, it is almost certain that after Amiens, his expertise was sought by other ambitious towns hoping to replicate or surpass that achievement. His name, inscribed at the base of the cathedral's labyrinth, was not just a signature, it was a brand. Then there was Hugues Libergier, the master behind the elegant and harmonious St. Nicaise church in Reims. His precise, geometrically perfect style was so admired that upon his passing, his fellow citizens honored him with a unique tombstone depicting him not as a pious donor, but as a professional, holding the tools of his trade, a square and a compass, with a model of his church at his feet. This was a public memorial for an artist of structure, a recognition that his mind had shaped their city's identity. The competition for such men was intense. A city council might send emissaries to a distant construction site, offering higher wages, a grand house, or exemptions from taxes to lure a master away. When a master moved, he did not come alone. He brought with him a trained team of key deputies and a mental library of solutions, tricks of the trade learned from previous projects. He might introduce a new method for calculating the thrust of a flying buttress, a more efficient template for cutting complex vault ribs, or a novel design for window tracery that would become the next fashionable trend. This movement of masters created a fascinating network of influence where stylistic innovations spread not through books, but through the migration of human talent. The construction of a cathedral became a high-stakes gamble, and the master mason was the most valuable chip a city could place on the table. His arrival promised innovation, stability, and the coveted prestige of a flawless, awe-inspiring build. In this silent war of spires, the greatest weapon was not in the quarry, but in the mind of the man who knew how to make the stone sing. While Amiens reached for the sky, another city chose a different path to supremacy, one that turned the competition inward. Bourges Cathedral, rising in the heart of France, represents the most brilliant lateral move in the entire Gothic rivalry. Its architects asked a profound question: what if victory was not measured in vertical feet, but in overwhelming, unified space? Their answer was a radical departure from the established blueprint. Abandoning the traditional cross-shaped plan with its projecting transepts, Bourges embraced a breathtakingly simple yet audacious concept: a vast, uninterrupted hall. Its interior is defined by a cascading series of 5 aisles, each stepping progressively higher toward the central nave, all flowing seamlessly from the west entrance to the eastern choir without a single transverse interruption. This design creates an ocean of space, a volume of staggering grandeur that envelops the worshipper in a single, cohesive sweep of stone and light. The psychological effect is one of immense, gathered unity, as if the entire community of the faithful is drawn forward together toward the altar. Here, the competition was not about piercing the heavens, but about mastering the earthly plane, creating a microcosm of a perfectly ordered world under one colossal vault. The stained glass program at Burghers is equally comprehensive, its windows forming a complete biblical narrative that wraps around this unified space, making the entire structure a luminous library of faith. This was a defiantly different vision of Gothic grandeur. Burghers proved that the fierce pressure of urban rivalry did not only produce copies of the current champion, it could also spark radical innovation. A city could look at the race for height and consciously decide to win by redefining the rules of the game itself. Their cathedral declared that true majesty lay not in a single skyward spire, but in the creation of a total, harmonious world under one roof. In doing so, Burghers ensured its place not as a taller cathedral, but as an unforgettable one, a masterpiece of spatial ambition that challenged the very terms of the contest. Reims Cathedral was not built to win a local contest, but to host a sacred national ritual. While other cities competed for civic pride, Reims held a monopoly on a ceremony that defined the French kingdom itself, the coronation of its kings. This unique status transformed its construction from a municipal project into a state-sponsored imperative, a physical embodiment of the divine right of monarchy. The oil used to anoint the monarch, according to legend, was delivered by a dove from heaven to Saint Remy for the baptism of King Clovis, forever linking the destiny of France to this specific city. Therefore, building a cathedral worthy of this heavenly mandate was a matter of national prestige and political theology. The architecture itself broadcast this message. The facade, wider and more imposing than perhaps any other, was designed as a monumental stage for royal processions. Its famous gallery of kings, a line of sculpted monarchs, visually cemented the continuity of the French crown within the sacred narrative of the Bible, suggesting their rule was part of a divine plan. Inside, the sheer spaciousness of the nave and choir was calculated to accommodate the immense crowds and elaborate pageantry of a coronation, making the building a functional instrument of power. The sculptural program went further, The central portal features the coronation of the Virgin Mary, a direct parallel to the coronation of earthly kings that took place just steps away at the altar. This was not subtle symbolism, it was a direct claim, equating the king's authority with heavenly endorsement. For other episcopal cities, this created a different, more daunting kind of rivalry. You could compete with Amiens for height or with Burghers for space, but how could you compete with a cathedral that literally held the key to royal legitimacy? Reims existed in a league of its own, its rivalry not with neighboring towns, but with any force that might challenge the sacred unity of church and crown it so stonefully represented. Its grandeur was a permanent argument for a political order, making it the ultimate cathedral of state power. While Reims hosted kings, Paris nurtured an empire of ideas. Notre-Dame de Paris stands as the ultimate cathedral of a capital city, a monument whose power stemmed not from record-breaking statistics, but from its position at the very crossroads of French political, intellectual, and artistic life. It was not the tallest nor the first, but it became the most influential, precisely because it served as the architectural laboratory for a rising nation's heart. Its master builders faced a unique challenge to create a cathedral worthy of a capital that was rapidly outgrowing its island in the Seine. Their ingenious response reshaped Gothic architecture itself. The initial, somewhat bulky structure was soon enveloped by a revolutionary support system, a double tier of flying buttresses that formed a graceful stone cage around the choir and nave. This was not just engineering, it was aesthetic alchemy. These slender, arching supports allowed the walls to become breathtakingly thin and the windows astonishingly large, achieving a delicate balance between solid stone and ethereal light that defined a new phase of the style. This is what historians call the rayonnant or radiant style, named for the radiating patterns of its enormous rose windows. Notre-Dame's facade became its defining masterpiece of public messaging. The iconic twin towers, the vast rose window, and the horizontal gallery of kings presented a harmonious, balanced face to the city, a symbol of order and stability emanating from the capital. Its sculpted portals, especially the poignant depiction of the Last Judgment on the central doorway, served as a powerful moral compass for the entire kingdom, placed at its administrative center. But perhaps its greatest innovation was intangible. Because it stood in Paris at the university and the royal palace, its design was witnessed, studied, and emulated by every bishop, abbot, and master mason who visited the seat of power. The rayonnant style it pioneered became the architectural export of the French monarchy, copied from Strasbourg to Prague. Notre-Dame's rivalry was not with the height of Amiens or the coronation pageantry of Reims, it was with obsolescence itself. It competed by setting the fashionable standard, by becoming the model that made other cathedrals look outdated, ensuring that the capital's aesthetic would literally shape the skyline of medieval Europe. But this architectural fever was not contained by the borders of France. Across the Channel, a different kind of rivalry was unfolding in stone, one that reveals how the competitive spirit of the Gothic Age could express itself through two radically different philosophies of building and urban identity. In England, the cathedrals of Salisbury and Lincoln stand as powerful counterpoints, each a masterpiece born from a distinct vision of what a cathedral should be and how a city should grow around it. Salisbury Cathedral is a marvel of unified intention. Following a bitter dispute between the clergy and the garrison at Old Sarum, the decision was made in the early 13th century to abandon the old hilltop site entirely and start fresh in the water meadows of the River Avon. This was a rare opportunity, a chance to build a perfect Gothic vision from the ground up, unencumbered by existing structures or cramped urban streets. The result is a cathedral of breathtaking coherence, a single, harmonious campaign completed in just 38 years, an astonishing pace for such a grand project. Its uniform early English Gothic style, with its long, elegant lancet windows and restrained sculptural decoration, gives it a serene, almost scholarly calm. The famous spire, added later, only accentuates this vertical unity. Salisbury's plan is a perfect double cross, its cloisters and chapter house neatly integrated into a sprawling, park-like close. This cathedral was not woven into an old city. It created its own planned city around it, a statement of ecclesiastical order rising from an open field. It represents the ideal of the cathedral as a complete, self-contained world, a vision achieved in one sustained collective act of will. Lincoln Cathedral, by stark contrast, tells a story of ambitious accumulation. Its foundation is far older, rooted in a Norman past, and it sits commandingly atop a steep hill, woven into the very fabric of the bustling medieval city below. Lincoln did not have the luxury of a blank slate. Instead, its greatness was achieved through a series of bold, often daring additions and rebuilds across centuries. Its most celebrated contribution to the Gothic race was not its overall plan, but a specific, revolutionary innovation: the introduction of the ribbed vault to England. Following a fire, the genius of an unknown master mason created the stunning vaults of the St. Hugh's Choir, using intersecting stone ribs to create a strong, lightweight ceiling that allowed for larger windows. This was not just repair, it was a leap forward, making Lincoln the pioneer of true Gothic vaulting in England. The cathedral continued to grow, adding the breathtaking Angel Choir in the 13th century, a radiant space of immense height and intricate detail, and later the central tower, which for over 200 years made Lincoln the tallest structure in the world. Lincoln's beauty is one of powerful, layered complexity, where Norman solidity meets Gothic lightness in a dynamic, sometimes unpredictable, dialogue. Here, then, are two paths to glory within the same national rivalry. Salisbury represents the power of the unified master plan, a cathedral built as a complete thought. Lincoln embodies the triumph of the persistent, adaptive vision, a cathedral that grew, innovated, and reached skyward by building upon its own history. One city staked its identity on serene, planned perfection in a new setting. The other asserted its supremacy through relentless innovation and vertical ambition on an ancient site. Their silent competition was not just about which was more beautiful, but about two enduring answers to a fundamental question: does a community build its dream all at once, or does it build its dream one soaring, improvised chapter at a time? The ambition of the Gothic race could not be contained by the borders of France, and its next great leap would require crossing the Rhine. In the bustling, wealthy city of Cologne, along the great trade artery of the Rhine River, bishops and burghers watched the soaring achievements of Amiens and Reims with a mixture of admiration and competitive resolve. They possessed a sacred treasure that demanded a setting of unparalleled magnificence: the relics of the three magi. These remains, believed to be those of the wise kings who visited the infant Christ, had been brought to Cologne in the 12th century, transforming the city into one of Europe's premier pilgrimage destinations. The modest existing cathedral was utterly unworthy of such a prize. In 1248, with the French Rayonnant style at its peak, Cologne made its bold declaration. They would not just build a new cathedral, they would import the very pinnacle of French ambition and then surpass it. The foundation stone laid that year was for a design of breathtaking scale, directly inspired by the plans of Amiens Cathedral but enlarged in every dimension. The choir alone, the first section to be built, was conceived as a forest of columns and a cage of light, aiming for a height and luminosity that would humble any French rival. This was not mere imitation, it was a statement of cultural and spiritual parity. The Holy Roman Empire, of which Cologne was a leading ecclesiastical principality, was asserting that it too could command the most advanced artistic language of the age, turning it to the glory of its own sacred patrons. The relics of the Magi provided both the spiritual justification and the economic engine. promising a river of pilgrims whose donations would fund this monumental act of one-upmanship. Yet the story of Cologne Cathedral reveals a profound truth about this trans-European rivalry, that the same ambition could unfold on a completely different timeline, shaped by a fractured political world. While French cathedrals often benefited from stronger central royal support, the Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of competing princes, bishops, and free cities. Funding for Cologne was sporadic, reliant on the city's own substantial wealth from trade and the fluctuating generosity of its archbishops, who were also powerful temporal rulers often embroiled in political conflicts. Construction progressed in fits and starts over centuries. The magnificent choir was completed in the 1400s, a space of such staggering height and delicate grace that it stood as a finished masterpiece, yet it was attached to a stunted, temporary nave for over 400 years. The grand west facade, with its iconic twin spires, remained only a fragment of a dream, a wooden crane perched atop the south tower as a silent, rusty monument to stalled ambition. This extremely long construction period, stretching across 6 centuries, is not a story of failure but of stubborn persistence. It reflects the immense scale of the original vision, a vision so grand that no single generation in that decentralized political landscape could see it through. The rivalry had been successfully imported, but the mechanism to win it, the sustained collective will and resource concentration, operated on a geological timescale. Cologne stood for generations as both a breathtaking achievement and an unfinished promise, a testament to the enduring power of an idea that began in the stone quarries of France, a dream of holy light so compelling that a city would dedicate itself to it, not for a lifetime, but for the life of a civilization. Yet as the Gothic race spread, it encountered a world with its own ancient architectural language. In the wealthy, powerful city of Milan, the decision to build a grand new cathedral was not a simple act of emulation, but a declaration of civic pride that would plunge the city into a century of artistic conflict. Milanese leaders looked north across the Alps at the soaring spires of France and Germany, and resolved to build something just as magnificent, a statement that their city was a European capital of the first rank. But they did not possess a native tradition of the Gothic style. What followed was one of the most fascinating and fractious building projects in history, a clash between imported northern ideals and stubborn Italian sensibilities. The initial design, begun in 1386, was entrusted to local Lombard masters, who naturally drew from their own background in heavier, more solid brick construction. Their early plans produced a structure that northern experts, when consulted, found utterly baffling. It was wide, bulky, and to their eyes hopelessly old-fashioned. The city council, determined to get it right, took an extraordinary step. They launched an international competition, inviting master masons from across Europe to diagnose the problems and propose solutions. This brought a flood of conflicting advice from French, German, and even English experts, each championing their own regional interpretation of the Gothic formula. The French masters, steeped in the vertical logic of Amiens, argued for taller, slenderer proportions and a forest of exterior pinnacles and statues. The German consultants emphasized complex vaulting and intricate stone tracery. The local Italian builders, however, resisted what they saw as fragile, overly complicated northern excess. They were accustomed to broad, spacious naves for large congregations and valued massive, enduring walls over delicate cages of glass. For decades, the cathedral workshop became a battleground of competing blueprints, with factions on the council supporting different foreign masters, leading to stops, starts, and constant revisions. The result of this contentious, collaborative soup is the breathtaking hybrid we see today. Milan Cathedral is a mountain of white marble, an overwhelming spectacle of sheer scale and density. Its most famous feature, a dazzling forest of over 3,000 statues and 135 marble pinnacles that crowd the rooftop, is a purely northern Gothic obsession pushed to an almost surreal extreme. Yet its overall shape remains distinctly Italian, extraordinarily wide and spacious, with a nave that feels more like a great hall than a vertiginous canyon. The windows are large, but the walls between them are still substantial, blocking light in a way a French master would have found unacceptable. This building is a compromise frozen in stone, a physical record of a city trying on a foreign style but never fully abandoning its own bones. Milan's story reveals a crucial truth about the great cathedral rivalry. The competitive impulse to build was universal, but the final form was always filtered through a local lens of tradition, materials, and taste. In Italy, the Gothic race did not produce a copy of Cologne or Amiens. It produced something entirely new, a magnificent and conflicted monument to a city's struggle to define its place in a wider world. But beyond the bishops and the master masons, the true foundation of every cathedral was the city itself. These stone dreams were not imposed from above. They were woven into the daily life of the community by thousands of ordinary hands. For generations, the construction site was the city's largest employer, a permanent, bustling engine that reshaped the social and economic landscape. The workforce was a vast, specialized hierarchy. At the top were the highly skilled Freemasons, the stonecutters who could read templates and carve intricate vault ribs. They were supported by rough masons who shaped the basic blocks, and armies of laborers who mixed mortar, hauled materials on their backs, and operated the great treadwheel cranes. Up in the wooden scaffolding, carpenters fashioned the temporary supports that held arches in place until the keystone was set. In workshops nearby, blacksmiths forged the tools and metal fittings, while glaziers, alchemists of light, meticulously cut, painted, and fired the panels of stained glass. This activity did not exist in a vacuum. It spawned entire supporting industries, from the quarries that provided stone and the forests that supplied timber, to the carters who transported it all, and the innkeepers and food vendors who fed the hungry crews. A city building a cathedral was a city in a state of permanent, purposeful mobilization. This multi-generational endeavor forged a powerful, shared civic identity. A grandfather might have helped lay the foundation. His son worked as a laborer on the nave walls, and his grandson could aspire to become an apprentice glazier completing the final windows. The project became a common story, a tangible link between past, present, and future. It created a collective pride in being not just citizens of York or Strasbourg, but builders of its greatest monument. This shared purpose could transcend social divisions, uniting nobles, merchants, and commoners in a single, holy cause. Guilds competed to fund the most beautiful chapel, and citizens from all walks contributed pennies to the fabric fund, each donation a stitch in the social tapestry. Yet this unifying force also contained the seeds of tension. The sheer cost could lead to resentment, especially if funds were diverted from other civic needs or if the tax burden fell unfairly on the poor. The cathedral workshop, with its own rules and privileges, could become a state within a state, its workers exempt from certain city laws. Strikes and disputes over wages and working conditions were not unknown, revealing the friction between spiritual ambition and economic reality. The very scale of the project tested the social order, demanding cooperation while simultaneously highlighting the inequalities that made such a colossal concentration of wealth and labor possible. In the end, the cathedral was more than a building, it was a mirror. It reflected a community's highest aspirations back at itself, but it also showed the complex, sometimes strained, human collaboration required to reach for heaven. The cathedral did not merely rise within the city, it became the city's new magnetic north. From a distance, the silhouette of a place like Chartres or Lincoln was no longer defined by a castle's battlements, but by the delicate stone lacework of its spire, a beacon visible to travelers long before they reached the gates. This visual dominance was a deliberate act of urban reordering, typically constructed on the hallowed ground of an older, smaller church. The new cathedral physically and symbolically planted itself at the heart of the community. Its overwhelming scale demanded space, and so the city reshaped itself to provide it. Existing homes and shops were often cleared to create a vast open square before the west facade. This was not left as empty ground, it was activated as the city's new living room. Markets, once scattered, consolidated here, with the cathedral's sculpted portals watching over the trade in cloth, grain, and spices. Public announcements were made from its steps, festivals unfolded in its shadow, and justice was sometimes administered in its open space, all under the stone gaze of saints and kings. The very streets of the city began to realign, not for convenience but for ceremony. Wider processional routes were carved through the urban fabric, creating sacred pathways for religious festivals. On feast days, the entire community could flow from the city gates, through the bustling market square, and into the luminous nave in one unbroken river of devotion. This reorganization made the cathedral the undisputed focal point of daily life. Your walk to work, your weekly market visit, your participation in a holiday, all were now choreographed around this one colossal building. It was the ultimate anchor, holding the city's social, economic, and spiritual life fast to the spot where its rivalrous ambition was most proudly displayed. The skyline now told a story not of feudal power but of civic aspiration, a declaration that the community's identity was forever centered on this shared stone prayer. These stone ambitions required a constant flow of gold, and that gold arrived on the soles of pilgrims' feet. Within the sacred economy of the Middle Ages, the most valuable currency was not minted in a royal treasury, but was often a fragment of bone, a scrap of cloth, or a sliver of wood. These were relics, the physical remains or belongings of saints and martyrs, believed to be conduits of divine power and grace. For a cathedral city, acquiring a prestigious relic was not just a spiritual coup, it was the ultimate economic development strategy. It transformed a local church into a destination, launching a powerful cycle where faith directly funded stone. Cities engaged in a quiet, fierce competition to secure these holy objects. Some were purchased at great cost from other churches or from returning crusaders. Others were received as diplomatic gifts from popes or emperors, a sign of high favor. And in more than a few cases, relics were simply taken, a pious theft known as furta sacra, where monks or agents would secretly remove a saint's remains from one town to bring them to another, believing the saint himself had chosen the move. However a relic arrived, its impact was immediate and measurable. A cathedral housing the skull of a major apostle or the cloak of the Virgin became a beacon on the medieval map. Pilgrims would undertake arduous, often dangerous journeys across continents to pray before these objects, seeking healing, forgiveness, or blessing. And where pilgrims traveled, wealth followed. These visitors needed food, lodging, and souvenirs. They paid fees to get closer to the sacred shrine. They purchased lead badges stamped with the cathedral's image to prove they had completed their journey, and they left donations in collection boxes, often as a vow for prayers answered or requested. This influx of capital created a direct, self-reinforcing loop. The initial donations funded the construction of a more beautiful and secure chapel to house the relic. That magnificent new shrine, adorned with gold and jewels, then attracted even more pilgrims, impressed by the display of devotion and the apparent power of the saint who inspired it. Their increased donations funded the next phase of construction, perhaps a new set of stained glass windows depicting the saint's life, which in turn enhanced the cathedral's reputation and draw. Consider the practical effect in a city like Canterbury after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. The site of his passing became one of the most popular pilgrimage destinations in Europe. The offerings left at his shrine were so vast they funded the entire reconstruction of the cathedral's choir in a stunning new Gothic style, a direct stone translation of spiritual revenue. Or look to Cologne, whose economic engine for centuries was the golden shrine of the three magi. The cathedral was quite literally built around this spiritual treasure, with the flow of pilgrims providing the steady capital to sustain the ambitious, centuries-long project. This created a fascinating form of holy one-upmanship. A city with a minor local saint might look with envy at a rival that had secured the arm of a major apostle. The quest for a more powerful relic became part of the architectural rivalry itself, a parallel competition for spiritual cachet that had very earthly financial consequences. The cathedral was both the cause and the effect of this economy, a machine that converted devotion into stone and stone back into greater devotion in a cycle that lifted entire cities toward the sky. Even the most fervent civic dream could meet an immovable earthly limit. The soaring trajectory of the Gothic race was not a smooth, unbroken ascent, but a jagged line punctuated by long pauses and permanent interruptions. For every Chartres completed in a single burst of energy, there were cathedrals that became frozen in time, their grand designs halted by forces far beyond the control of any master mason. These unfinished giants stand as powerful, silent witnesses to the fragile balance between ambition and reality. Take the magnificent facade of Reims Cathedral, the coronation church of kings. Its lower level, rich with sculpted portals, was finished in the 13th century, but the grand towers intended to crown it, they were never built. Work slowed, then stopped, as the kingdom's fortunes were drained by prolonged conflict, shifting political priorities, and the immense financial strain of the 100 Years' War. The facade we see today, while breathtaking, is literally a stump, a masterpiece cut off at the shoulders. Across the Rhine, Strasbourg Cathedral presents a different kind of interruption. Its single, soaring spire, a lacework of stone that dominated the skyline for centuries, was meant to have a twin. The plans were drawn, the foundation was prepared, but the second tower never rose. The reasons were a mix of the practical and the philosophical. The financial cost had become staggering, and perhaps more tellingly, a new intellectual wind was beginning to blow through Europe. The Renaissance was dawning, bringing with it a different aesthetic that viewed the frantic verticality of the late Gothic style as old-fashioned, even excessive. The city's leaders looked at their half-finished project and simply decided the age of that particular race was over. The most common halting forces were brutally material. Prolonged regional wars could devastate a city's economy and redirect all resources toward defense. Waves of illness could depopulate urban centers, wiping out both the skilled workforce and the donor base in a tragic, rapid span. A sudden economic downturn, like the failure of a major local industry, could dry up the municipal coffers overnight, and sometimes the project itself became a victim of its own early success. A cathedral might be built just enough to be functional, its choir and a portion of the nave enclosed for worship. With the primary spiritual need met, the urgent, collective drive to complete the original visionary plan could dissipate across generations, leaving the building in a permanently unfinished state. These cathedrals are not failures, they are honest chronicles. Their missing towers and roofless naves tell a parallel history to the tales of triumph, a history of changing tastes, depleted treasuries, and human hardship. They remind us that the great competition was not just a story of what communities could achieve, but of what they could sustain. In their incomplete grandeur, they pose a poignant question: is a dream any less powerful for remaining partially unbuilt, or does its very incompletion make it a more authentic monument to the reach of a city's hope? The great stone race could not outrun history. By the 14th century, the forces that had fueled this monumental rivalry began to falter, one by one, under the weight of profound societal change. A series of widespread health challenges swept across Europe, dramatically reducing populations and disrupting the very networks of labor and pilgrimage that cathedrals depended upon. At the same time, prolonged conflicts between kingdoms, like the 100 Years' War between England and France, drained royal treasuries and municipal coffers alike, redirecting funds from building campaigns to the immediate demands of defense and survival. Theologians and philosophers, meanwhile, began to turn their focus inward toward personal piety and intimate devotion, which lessened the overwhelming public demand for colossal architectural statements of collective faith. The age of launching century-long civic projects was fading, replaced by an era of more immediate, pressing concerns. The scaffolding came down, and for many cathedrals, it would not go back up for generations, leaving their spires forever stunted or their facades incomplete. This was not a sudden stop, but a slow ebbing of the competitive tide that had lifted stone into the sky for 200 years. Then, from the south, a new wind began to blow, carrying a completely different blueprint for beauty. The Renaissance emerged not merely as a new artistic style, but as a philosophical rebuttal to the very heart of the Gothic ethos, where Gothic architecture sought to overwhelm, to lift the soul toward an invisible heaven through vertiginous height and fractured light. Renaissance thinkers looked back to the ideals of ancient Greece and Rome. They championed human-scale proportion, mathematical harmony, and the clear, rational logic of the circle and the square. Their ideal building was not a transcendental rocket, but a perfectly balanced temple, where every part related to the whole in a way that celebrated human reason as much as divine order. The competitive drive did not disappear, of course. Patrons now vied to build the most harmonious palace or the most learned library, but the terms of the contest had fundamentally changed. The race was no longer vertical, aiming for a record-breaking nave, but horizontal, aiming for a new kind of perfection found in balance, symmetry, and the rediscovered wisdom of the ancients. The skyward thrust of the Gothic Age had reached its zenith, and the human gaze, once fixed on the vaults of heaven, slowly turned back toward the earth. Yet the story of these cathedrals did not end with the last medieval mason laying down his tools. Centuries later, a new kind of rivalry would emerge, one fought not with new construction, but with passionate restoration. The 19th century saw a powerful movement sweep across Europe and beyond, the Gothic Revival. In an age of industrial smoke and rapid change, artists, writers, and architects looked back to the Middle Ages with a sense of romantic longing, seeing in its cathedrals a lost world of craftsmanship, faith, and organic beauty. This was not mere nostalgia, it was a creative crusade. Figures like Eugene Viollet-le-Duc in France became the new masters of the Gothic dream. Viollet-le-Duc did not see himself as a simple repairman. He was a restorer in the most ambitious sense, an architect-historian who believed his duty was to complete buildings according to what he understood as their true, ideal spirit, even if that meant adding elements that had never existed before. His work on Notre-Dame de Paris is the most famous example. He designed and built the cathedral's iconic spire, a soaring, lace-like structure that replaced a simpler, older one. He populated the rooftop with a bestiary of fantastical gargoyles and chimeras, stone creatures, that have since become inseparable from the building's identity in the public imagination. His philosophy was controversial, even radical. For him, to restore a building was not to preserve it as a ruin, but to reinstate it to a state of completeness that might never have existed at any single moment in history. This revivalist energy was not confined to France. In England, the Houses of Parliament were rebuilt in a grand neo-Gothic style, asserting national identity through medieval forms. In cities from Cologne to Vienna, long-stalled projects were suddenly revived with fresh fervor and modern engineering. finally completing towers and facades that had been unfinished dreams for 500 years. This 19th-century movement fundamentally changed our relationship with these structures. It transformed them from aging relics of a bygone faith into living monuments of national heritage and artistic genius. The rivalry was no longer between medieval cities, but between modern nations to champion and reclaim their own cultural pinnacles. The cathedral was reborn not as a place of worship alone, but as a secular icon of history itself. Then, in April 2019, the world watched in collective disbelief as flames engulfed the roof of Notre-Dame de Paris. The sight of that spire, Violet-le-Duc spire, collapsing into the inferno was a visceral shock felt across the globe. In that moment, the abstract idea of shared heritage became a powerful, emotional reality. The response was immediate and staggering. Pledges for reconstruction poured in from billionaires, corporations, and, most tellingly, from hundreds of thousands of ordinary individuals around the world giving small donations. This was not a medieval tithe driven by faith in a saint, but a modern outpouring driven by a shared sense that a piece of our common human story was under threat. The fire and its aftermath revealed something profound. These cathedrals have successfully made the leap from symbols of medieval urban competition to belonging to something much larger. They are now keystones of world heritage, their preservation a global civic project. The modern restoration site, with its international teams of experts using laser scans and traditional oak timber, is the descendant of the medieval workshop. The rivalry today is against time, decay, and oblivion. When we invest in saving these stones, we are not rebuilding a church for a single city. We are preserving a chapter in the story of human ambition for everyone. The great Gothic race, once a fierce contest for local supremacy, has found its ultimate purpose in uniting us across centuries and borders around the fragile, enduring beauty we collectively decided must not be lost. A city's identity was no longer something that simply grew. It was something deliberately built. The rivalries between Chartres and Amiens, between Burghers and Beauvais, forged a new understanding of what a city could be. Before the Gothic Age, urban pride was anchored in defensive walls, a bustling port, or a lord's castle. But as these stone giants rose, they redefined the very metrics of prestige. A city now measured itself, and was measured by others, through the audacious language of its cathedral. Height became a direct translation of ambition, a stone spine asserting a community's reach toward the divine. Light, in the form of vast stained glass narratives, signaled both immense wealth and theological sophistication, proving a city could command the finest materials and craftsmen to illuminate sacred stories. The sculpted facade served as a permanent public ledger, recording a city's sacred patrons, its political alliances, and the civic unity that made such a project possible. This was not a passive symbol, but an active declaration. To build a cathedral of such scale was to publicly wager a century's worth of collective resources on a single vision. It demonstrated that a city possessed not just the coin, but the confidence to undertake a venture whose completion its founders would never see. It proved a piety so deep it could mobilize generations. And it carved a city's place into a dual order, asserting its significance within both a heavenly hierarchy and the competitive network of earthly powers. The marketplace showed what a city sold, the walls showed what it defended, but the cathedral showed what it believed itself to be. In the end, these rivalries did more than produce breathtaking architecture. They forged the modern concept of the city as a conscious, ambitious author of its own destiny, an identity permanently set in vaulted stone and jeweled light. Numbers alone cannot capture the awe these buildings inspire, yet they tell a crucial story of escalation and choice. Let us place the great rivals side by side, not as static monuments, but as competitors in a frozen race. Chartres Cathedral, our foundational blueprint, set the early standard with a nave vault reaching 121 feet toward the heavens. Its construction, remarkably swift, spanned just 26 years after the fire of 1194, a testament to unified civic will. Its defining feature remains the unparalleled expanse of its original stained glass, a luminous narrative in deep cobalt and ruby red. Amiens, the height specialist, looked at that number and saw a challenge. Its architects pushed the Gothic skeleton to achieve a nave vault of 138 feet, claiming the title of tallest completed cathedral in France for centuries. Built over a longer period from around 1220 to 1269, its strategy was one of pure vertical ambition, creating that breathtaking canyon of space. Then came Burghers, the lateral thinker. It rejected the height race entirely, offering instead a nave of 124 feet, but within a revolutionary design. Its vast, uninterrupted hall, with 5 cascading aisles stretching over 400 feet in length, created a different kind of grandeur focused on overwhelming horizontal volume and unified space. Reims, the coronation stage, matched Amiens in nave height at 125 feet, but its true distinction lies in its purpose and facade. Constructed across most of the 13th century, its extraordinary width and sculptural program were engineered for royal ceremony, making it a cathedral of state power first and foremost. Finally, we look to Cologne, the imported ambition. Its design, directly inspired by Amiens but enlarged, aimed for a choir vault of 154 feet, a number that would have shattered all records. Yet its timeline reveals the different reality of the Holy Roman Empire. Begun in 1248, its choir was finished by 1322, but the entire structure remained incomplete for over 600 years, its iconic spires only rising in the 1800s. This comparative anatomy reveals the strategic landscape. Chartres proved it could be done. Amiens quantified the race. Bourges changed the rules. Reims served a crown. And Cologne pursued a dream on a geological timescale. Each number, each date, each distinctive feature is a fossilized decision, a permanent record of how a city chose to compete in the greatest architectural contest the world had ever seen. But for every cathedral that pierced the sky, there exists a shadow twin, a phantom of even greater ambition. The stone we see represents only the winning hand in a high-stakes game, while the true scale of the dream is often found in forgotten parchment and abandoned foundation trenches. These unbuilt giants, known only from surviving workshop drawings or the ghostly outlines of their first stones, reveal that the rivalry was not limited by what could be constructed, but only by the boundless imagination of the age. One of the most astonishing of these ghost cathedrals was planned for the city of Narbonne in southern France. In the late 13th century, flush with wealth and inspired by the triumphs of the north, the cathedral chapter envisioned a building of truly apocalyptic scale. Their surviving plan shows a design that would have made even the soaring vaults of Amiens seem modest. The proposed nave was to stretch an almost unimaginable 180 feet into the air, a height that would have required engineering far beyond the capabilities of the time, pushing the Gothic skeleton into realms of pure fantasy. The choir was begun, and its existing walls still stand today as a magnificent fragment, a haunting clue to the colossal ambition that was halted. The project stalled, likely due to the immense cost and the sheer technical audacity required, leaving Narbonne with a permanent testament to a dream too large for its world. Across the Mediterranean, another phantom rises from the archives. The original plan for the new St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, before the Renaissance redesign we know today, was conceived in the late Gothic style. Drawings from the mid-15th century by architects like Bernardo Rossellino show a vision that was essentially a supercharged Gothic cathedral, with a long nave, towering spires, and a forest of flying buttresses, all intended to crown the tomb of the first pope. This design, a last great gasp of the medieval competitive spirit at the very heart of Christendom, was ultimately swept aside by the new classical ideals of Bramante and Michelangelo. Yet its existence on paper is a powerful reminder that the Gothic impulse, the drive to build higher and more luminously than any predecessor, remained potent right up to the moment the Renaissance declared the race over. These unbuilt plans serve a crucial purpose in our understanding. They pull back the curtain on the psychological landscape of the rivalry. The built cathedrals of Chartres or Cologne are the compromises, the brilliant negotiations between vision and reality, between divine aspiration and the stubborn limits of physics, finance, and time. The drawings for Narbonne or the early St. Peter's show the vision in its raw, unfiltered state. They represent the pure ambition before gravity and practicality whispered their necessary corrections. This parallel world of paper architecture confirms that the competition was as much about the idea of supremacy as it was about the physical trophy. A city's prestige could be bolstered merely by circulating plans for a cathedral of unprecedented scale, signaling to rivals that their intellect and ambition knew no bounds, even if their treasury eventually did. So when we stand in the nave of a great cathedral, we are not just witnessing an achievement, we are standing in the presence of a moderated dream. The silent, empty space around it, the space where the even greater Phantom Cathedral was meant to be, is the true measure of the age's hunger. It reminds us that the stones that rise are only the answers we manage to build, while the questions posed on those ancient parchments were infinitely, breathtakingly larger. The medieval competition for souls and stone has evolved into a modern contest for visitors and views. While the master masons and bishops are long gone, the cathedrals they built remain the undisputed champions in a new global arena, where cities now compete for cultural capital, UNESCO World Heritage listings, and the economic lifeblood of international tourism. This contemporary rivalry is the direct descendant of the old urban contests, with the cathedral serving as the same central, irreplaceable asset. A city like Chartres or Cologne is no longer trying to prove its piety to a neighboring diocese, but to market its uniqueness to a world of travelers with endless choices. The goal has shifted from divine favor to a place on the coveted World Heritage List, a designation that functions as a kind of secular sainthood for a site, guaranteeing global recognition and often a significant boost in visitor numbers. When you walk through the crowded square before Notre Dame or join the queue for the towers of Cologne Cathedral, you are participating in the latest chapter of a centuries-old story. You are the pilgrim in this modern economy of awe, and your presence validates the success of a branding campaign that began 800 years ago. The cathedral is no longer just a church, it is a city's flagship store, its most powerful logo, and the anchor of its heritage industry. Municipal budgets now fund sophisticated lighting schemes to make the facade glow for nighttime photographers, visitor centers that explain the medieval building campaign, and marketing campaigns that highlight the cathedral as the must-see heart of any visit. This generates a self-reinforcing cycle remarkably similar to the medieval relic economy. Tourist spending supports local businesses, which contributes to municipal revenue, part of which is reinvested in preserving and promoting the cathedral, which in turn attracts more tourists. The drive for distinction that once fueled a race to build the tallest nave now fuels a race to create the most compelling visitor experience, the most viral social media moment, or the most meticulously preserved historic site. When you stand in that luminous nave, you are not just looking at medieval glass, you are standing inside the ultimate result of urban ambition, a machine for generating wonder that has been meticulously refined across half a millennium. The stones were laid to win a rivalry, and today they still do. The great Gothic race was ultimately a story of cities speaking to each other in a language of stone and light. Each cathedral, from the harmonious unity of Salisbury to the fractured ambition of Beauvais, stands as a physical manifesto of its community's will. It was a declaration forged in the heat of intense urban rivalry, an engine that drove technological leaps in engineering, transformed local economies through pilgrimage and craft, and crystallized a new, powerful form of civic identity. These structures were never passive backdrops, they were the active protagonists in a continent-wide drama of aspiration. When we picture a medieval city today, our mind's eye is invariably drawn to the silhouette of its cathedral, a testament to how completely these competitions redefined the very image of urban life. They teach us that human ambition, when channeled through collective purpose, can literally reshape the sky. So the next time you stand before one of these stone giants, look beyond the artistry of the rose window or the grandeur of the vault. See it instead as a frozen moment in an ancient contest, a permanent record of a city's daring gamble on its own future, a declaration that still whispers across the centuries about what it means to build a community worthy of touching the heavens.